So welcome back everyone from the coffee break. Just before I introduce the next session chair, just some housekeeping information. Can people please put their phones on vibrate? Okay. That's the end of the housekeeping information for now. I'd like to introduce the next session chair, who is InKyung Choi. So InKyung is the head of the Statistical Modernization and Management Unit at the Statistics Division of the UN Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE, and Secretariat for the High-Level Group for the Modernization of Official Statistics, the HLG MOS. So over to you, InKyung.
Yeah, thank you, David. So welcome to session 3. I think this might be the most disciplined audience that I've ever seen. So thank you for being on time. And first of all, I really want to appreciate the organizer of this conference, Cosmos, because you provide this platform where the official statistics community, research community, and also private sector to get together and to talk about metadata, which I don't find many occasions. So I really appreciate this because from the official statistics community side, the level of urgency of this existential question, whether are we doing enough for our data users, or are users finding our data okay, the urgency is really high. And I cannot speak from the research community side, but then I think there is also a great benefit from the research community to access statistical data from the national and international statistics organization is very high, because we are trying to provide more data at micro level and also provide more diverse data services. So thank you for this opportunity to talk about the metadata, how to improve fairness and the smartness of metadata. So yeah, we often hear fair in the context of data, but the principle apply for any asset. So having the vocabulary and terminology and statistical classification, findable, accessible, interpretable, and reusable are very important foundation for fair data and the smart metadata. So in this session, we have 3 presentations from National Statistics Office, International or Regional Statistical Office, and also International Committee on Data. So we will hear very diverse perspective and experience in terms of managing these assets, fair and then the smart. So we will start the presentation from Christine Laaboudi-Spoiden. Sorry if I miss up your name. So the running of this session is, it will be mix of session 1 and 2. So after each presentation, you will have an opportunity to raise questions immediately. And if you have any question that is applicable for any speaker of the session, or if you need just time to formulate your question, you can save it until the end of all the presentations. So a little word about Christine. So she's a statistical assistant at Eurostat with 2 decades experience in the European Commission. She's a metadata specialist focusing on linked data modeling and knowledge representation of controlled vocabulary, statistical classification, ontology, and data modeling for structural metadata, including XCOS, DCAT, and SMX. And her dedication lies in ensuring the accessibility and interpretability of statistical structural metadata and within the European statistical system. And she is excited to share her expertise at the Cosmos. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm going to give an overview of the modernization of the ISSS statistical classification. So I will explain the 2 steps for data transformation. I will talk about the tools we have used for the maintenance and the dissemination of our classification. and the availability of the ESSS, so the European Statistical System Structural Metadata, SLOD. And then I will give some examples about the implementation of the FAIR principles to statistical classification. And the last point, I will talk about our LOD community of practice. So about the modernization of ESS classification. So until June 2023, we disseminated our classification in a previous system, a relational database dated back for 20 years. And we decided to change the way of dissemination. And so we go between 2021 and 2023 through a different transformation phase. And from July 2023, we are offering our classification in new dissemination platforms. So in the old system, our classification, the FAIR principle for our classification were very limited. So the codes were not, the classification were not findable. We didn't use any persistent identifier. We apply conceptual knowledge representation, but not really technically standardized. The accessibility to the file was also really limited. The file, the distribution of the classification were offered in different formats. The interoperability between the correspondence table was based on different identifiers, and we also distributed them into different file formats without no standardized headers. And the reusability of the object was mainly HTML description, not really standardized. So in the first step, we decided to convert the classification from Ramon, which was the name of the previous system, into SDMX. And we also converted all the code lists used in Eurobase, which is the Eurostat reference database, into SDMX. And we expose the classification and the SDMX code, the code list in the Euro SDMX registry. And for the second step, we converted all the statistical classification used for the production of European Statistique into RDF. So in the previous system, we published everything, the classification from Eurostat, used for the production of European Statistique, but also we replicated classification published by a third party, such as UNSD. So in the step 2, we convert all the correspondence table in RDF, provided that the target classification is also a RDF classification, and we expose them as link open data. So for the transformation to SDMX, we drafted a conceptual mapping between the property used in the previous system and the SDMX properties. So and we developed a script. So the script was based on the SDMX information model. So at first, we modeled the basic structural elements, such as the URN or identifier, the code, the name, the parent. And for the specific element of statistical classification, for instance, the explanatory node, the case law, the classification level, we applied the SDMX annotation. And we uploaded the classification in the Euro SDMX registry, and we upgrade the graphical user interface of the registry in order to be able to select the classification. So the dataset, they are downloadable in SDMX XML, but they are also accessible via the SDMX API. So for the second step, we transform the structure file provided by the business unit from Eurostat into RDF triple. So the transformation was based on CSV Excel. And we use a tool embedded in one of the link open data tool used for the maintenance of classification. And yes, one important information is that now we are developing a tool for transforming RDF into SDMX 3.0. So this tool will be embedded in the classification maintenance tool. And the standardization, the representation of the classification, is based on SCOS, which is a standard generic data model for representing control vocabularies, and XCOS, which is the extension of SCOS applied to the representation of a statistical classification. And we follow the XCOS best practices, which is a document published in July 23, sorry. That's a mistake, yes. And for the maintenance, the storage and dissemination, we use a set of tools offered by the Publication Office of the EU. So this is an overview of the different tools. So for the maintenance and editing of the classification, we use an open source system called Vocbench, and this tool enables to transform the structured data into RDF triple. And the second tool is ShowVoc. So this is the dissemination tool of Vocbench. And in ShowVoc, you can search, download, but it enables an advanced visualization in the XCOS ontology. And ShowVoc offers an integrated Sparkle endpoint, but in ShowVoc, we have one endpoint per dataset. So it's not possible to run a federated query across the classification. And then the third one is called a Cellar. So Cellar is the name of the big triple store of the Publication Office. And 3 times a year, we disseminate our vocabularies in this big triple store. And in Cellar, there is one Sparkle endpoint enabling federated queries across our classification, but also a remote classification such as ISIC or CPC. And Cellar also offers API with a generated URL. And the last tool is the European Data Portal. So once we have disseminated the data in Cellar, the description of the classification, the dataset, are published in the EU Open Data Portal. And for the representation, we follow DCAT AP. So this is another overview of what we have published and what is available as link open data. So we have published the main classification series. Now we have 40 classifications available, but we also offer metadata catalogs. We have a dataset of business statistic manual from Eurostat, a list of the standards approved by the ISS. And we have now 2 glossaries, one glossary of prices and one about quality. And we have also a code list, which are reused inside a reference by the classification. So we can call them fair code list. We have a list of unit, one of production unit, and a list of waste category. Okay, so yes, this is a table comparing the fair principle applied to SDMX and XCOS, but I won't go through the table because it will take me too much time. But I will explain few principles in the next slide. So about findability, so we can say that our metadata are assigned a global unique identifier. So for the LOD classification in RDF, we are assigning URI, Unique Resource Identifier, in the domain data.europa.eu. So this is the generic domain for all the EU data and metadata. And we use one namespace per classification series. So for instance, UNECE is disseminated in the namespace UX2. And so below you can see that on the UX2 we have the different version of NACE, NACE 2.1, NACE 2. And we also use one unique resource identifier by resource, one for the code item, one for the classification level, one for the classification itself. And the data, they are described with rich metadata, SCOS, XCOS. And in SDMX, we also use a unique, persistent unique identifier, which is called the URN. So we have an identifier for the code list, the code, the hierarchy, the representation map. And data are also compliant with the SDMX information model. In terms of accessibility, so the metadata, they are retrievable by their identifier using a standardized communication protocol. So in LOD, each resource is accessible, and if you access a resource, so if you are a machine, you can get the data in RDF. If you are human, the machine are human readable. But in SDMX, it's partially true because you can have access to the whole code list, extract the whole code list through the API, but you cannot have access to one specific code item inside the code list. In terms of representation, this is a table comparing the conceptual data model, JSIM, XCOS, and SDMX 3.0. So the statistical classification in XCOS is called the concept scheme. In SDMX, this is the code list. Then we have the classification item, which is a concept in XCOS and a code in SDMX. But you can see that a classification level has no representation into SDMX, and we were obliged to consider it as a SDMX annotation. So the metadata use a formal, accessible, shared, and broadly applicable knowledge representation. In terms of interoperability, yes, this is one use case. We developed 2 years ago R package for generating correspondence table. And this package is able to extract the data automatically, the CSV data, from the triple store, so for Eurostat from Cella, and also FAO classification from the FAO triple store called Caliper. And this is enabled because we, FAO and ISTAT use the same XCOS common knowledge representation. So in terms of reuse, we publish the dataset description in the European Data Catalog. So Eurostat has published 8,000 datasets, and the datasets are compliant with DCAT AP. So this is the standard for describing a dataset in Data Catalog. The dataset, they are identified by a digital object identifier, recorded into DataSite. And now we are implementing the enriched description in StatDCAT. So StatDCAT enabled to represent the dimension, the attribute, unit of measurement. And so the opportunity, the future will be to linking dataset with classification, so sharing the same dimension, or finding dataset sharing the same dimension. So this is my last slide. I'm good with the timing. 1 year ago, we initiated a community of practice, a link open data community of practice with the ISS and UNECE. And the objective is sharing experience and best practices and providing visibility to the initiative of the member of the community. And so we have 12 participants. ISS members, one international organization, FAO, and Statistique Canada. And we have set up 4 task teams, one for linking dataset and structural metadata, one for linking statistical classification, one developing API, and the last one for linking dataset in data catalog. So now we are working on a proof of concept around 2 domains, census and LFS. Thank you.
Any question for Christine? Yes, Barbara.
This was very interesting, and I think you did all together a great job in doing this. I wonder a little bit, interoperability is also making sure that the code lists that are now fair are made interoperable, because there are so many out there. And for doing this, we speak in the FAIR community about fair mappings. And I invite some of the statistical researchers here helping to make this fair to join the FAIR mappings birth of feather at RDA that starts now in, I think in May 20 or so. We have RDA. We need somebody from the statistical community to bring in the use cases.
Yes, about code list. In Eurostat, we are, our colleague in the business unit are just starting thinking that we should harmonize. So yes, we are now working on the harmonization on crop code list. And there is also an initiative at the level of the European Commission. And there is a group called Coordination Group thinking and setting up a reference corporate code list. So we have now one code list for countries and territories.
I was addressing more the meta level of mappings. It's not exactly looking into each of these concepts. It's more how you do that. There is, for example, SESAM, an ontology that makes mappings fair. And you should be aware that you need provenance for each of the concepts that are mapped. So it's going a little bit beyond the normal harmonization. Yeah.
Yes, no, we follow the XCOS. So it's richer than SCOS, but not enough richer. But we had a talk with Arofan about something. Yes. Thank you.
I'll try to keep them honest, Barbara. But we have been talking a bit about the work that Jan is doing. So.
Any other question on this presentation? Okay, then we will move to the second presentation. So while you are settling, so Claudia Brunini is the first researcher specialized on metadata, terminology, semantic, territorial data analysis, and corporate products. So she has been working at ISTAT, Italian Statistical Institute, now more than 2 decades, and since 2019 at the Directorate for the Methodology and Statistical Process Design, and now is responsible for vocabulary and remodeling of microdata. Her main works include harmonization of statistical terms used in the ISTAT and updating of the central statistical vocabulary. And this activity aims to link concepts to all the metadata of the Institute. Yeah, floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, in this article that I wrote with Emanuela Ricchini, I tell you about the term that is the minimum unit of the terminological collection, okay, and about the relationship with the statistical metadata. In these years, we have worked a lot on the term and on its definition because we think that it has a crucial role on the semantic developments of the central metadata system. I go on this way, okay. Okay, this slide illustrates the complex transition ISTAT is actually engaged. We can't hear. Okay. Okay. And we are moving from a management based on the local government of processes to one where centralized structures fully carry out their role as providers of services. And this process, how we can see, is very complex, and it has many intermediate phases where the centralization is only partial. And in this context, the centralized metadata management system that we call the MetaStat represents an important component. This component is under construction. Effectively, it doesn't exist at the moment, but we are projecting. And in our mind, MetaStat will help us to have a metadata management where metadata represent an ecosystem, will have a semantic consistency, will be compliant with standards, centralized and with a strong management, usable in one clear way by all processes and throughout all phases of the same process, and will be managed throughout their life cycle. MetaStat is based on three components: the system of referential metadata, the system of structural metadata, and the system of terminological collection. These three components already exist and are managed freely of each other, independently, like silos. MetaStat will help us to connect them, and the principal element of connection will be the statistical program cycle between the statistical program cycle that has an important role, that is, it is the releaser of metadata and terms. So with the statistical program cycle, we are going to connect referential metadata and structural metadata. The term that is the minimal unit of it will be the minimal unit of connection between the glossary and the structural metadata. Okay, so because of this important role we are giving to the term, we have exactly defined it. And we see it as the association of two elements, the lemma and its definition. And it is necessary to refer to the lemma definition pair as a uniquely determined element, because in the language of NSOs, terms with same lemma but different definition, polysemy, are currently used, and vice versa, terms with the same definition but different lemma also are currently used, and they are synonyms. So the lemma has the important role to perform the onomasiological function of appointing the concept, and it may consist of a single word, a group of words, or a more or less complete sentence. It is therefore a medium-length text field. The definition has the function of specifying the role assigned to the lemma in the reference domain. It requires a text field of significant length. Semantically, it is formulated by first placing the concept in the class domain of reference in the class of object to which it belongs, thus making the term's domain of reference immediately clear. It then expresses any further explanation, including examples. Sometimes researcher can put after the specialized definition also more generic definitions. Okay, for the term we have built a governance, and this governance will be coherent and connected that one we applied to structural metadata and referential metadata. So the three components will form metastat. In this governance, the responsible of the program will be everything starts from the statistical program, and the responsible of the statistical program, yes, okay, and the responsible for the statistical program of the statistical program has in charge the birth of the term. That is the first step. And after that, the term will be validated from by the responsible of the centralized terminological collection. Before that, we have the responsible of the statistical program that will fill in the terminological card. After that, the term will be validated, and that will be. We are sure that it will be coherent with all the other terms in the terminological collection. Will be put in the glossary, and the glossary that is in communication with the others metadata in ISTAT. Okay. Okay, we are this is the last phase, so we are building the centralized glossary that we are that now we call terminological collection, because the terms in the terminological collection are completed with metadata. Actually, we are working on the relationships between the terms. That means we are documenting the semantic relationships. So the equivalence relationships, the hierarchical relationships, and the associative relationships. Okay, that is the project we are doing actually in ISTAT. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Any questions about the presentation? Yes, Christine.
Oh, are you extracting the information from the definition?
Where?
Oh,
this
are you using AI or?
From the sources. For us, the sources are the statistical program. When the thematic researchers construct the metadata, they, in our mind, they are the source of the definitions, because they give the definitions to the lemmas they use. So everything births in the statistical program.
But is it an automatic process or human?
Yes. In our mind, actually, it's semi-automated. Because every phase is local, so we collect But metastat the task of metastat is transform to all this process in automated process.
Any other question? Yeah, I have one question about this the governance part. So you talk about the birth of a term and how it works for the death of the term, because this might be area where people are ready to fight until the end, not to lose their term that they already used in the program. So how it works when you have to kill?
Okay. We don't kill terms. They remain in the database, and we connect to the term the dates of its life. So the dates of birth, all the uses, and when a term is not anymore used, because we give him the ending date of validity, and it remains in the system because it is surely used in the dissemination. So if there is someone that read a data with that kind of definition, he can find the right definition.
If there's no further question, we will move to the last presentation of the day. So Arofan.
Okay.
Yes, I don't plan to introduce you again, so yeah, take your microphone.
Do you want to introduce yourself? So, that's it. Hi, my name is George Alter. I'm with the University of Michigan, where I used to be. I'm emeritus now. George made me give this talk because he's really, I like to give credit where credit is due, and this was a really interesting project between the IUSSP, which is the Social Scientists, it's the Social Scientists Demographers Union, basically, we call it. And George, you're involved with that group. And then CODATA, which is sort of the other hat I'm wearing here. And George really drove this. I was one of the co-chairs along with Steve McEachran, whom you may know. But I think, George, that you were the driving force behind this. So I'm happy to give your slides for you today. You'll see some other names up there, too. Who is this Edgardo guy? Do we know him? I think we might. And some of you may know Abdullah, and I think Frank Coton, maybe familiar to some of you. There were a lot of people in this group, and I'll show you a full list of names at the end. There are a lot of people here or who are active in STMX and DDI who were part of this group. And I'd like to sort of acknowledge that, because what I'm doing is reporting on a work that was not authored by any single person. This was an 18-month project jointly sponsored by the IUSSP and CODATA. Now, for those of you from the official statistics world, scientific research isn't really that well organized in the same way that official statistics is. So you don't have treaties and things, but you do have these groups of like-minded scientists who get together internationally and work on issues that are important within their domains. And CODATA is the data arm of an organization whose membership is those organizations. So Royal Academies of Science and lots of these kinds of organizations get together and address issues related to science. And from a data perspective, IUSSP is obviously interested in demography and demographic data. And we pulled together a group of about 20 different people, and we had some invited experts also brought into that during the course of an 18-month project where we met pretty much every 2 weeks. So it was a fairly aggressive work program. I think you all know what FAIR is, and if you don't, you should do your homework. I'm not gonna tell you. Everybody knows the FAIR principles, and I think it's becoming more and more important within, for data use across the board. So the topic of this was really to look at demographic control vocabularies and figure out how to make them more fair. Now, I think it's important that demography was the place where this started, because when you look at official statistics, a lot of the classifications that are used on the scientific side are coming out of the official statistics world. There's a lot of crossover. Official statistics is concerned a lot with population and with people. And obviously demography as a science is as well. And so I think this is a sort of great poster child as a domain for looking at fairness. How do I make that go? Fair is, and I think you've heard this already today, it's about making data machine friendly. It's not enough to take a PDF and give it a DOI. Not good. That's not really fair, and certainly not fair when it comes to dealing with something as critical and as granular as a controlled vocabulary. And so the idea of fair to us was really to reduce that element of data wrangling, of get the human out of the picture as much as possible, and try to be able to automate data coming from a bunch of different sources and to manage the controlled vocabularies. Now, we've been hearing about the work at Eurostat, which I think is amazing, and then more from the scientific side about how you define the terms and manage that process. And neither one of those things is easy. And I think in this work, it became clear that those things have to be done together in a way that does a handshake, because you can harmonize the terms, and if they're locked up in a PDF, they're really not getting you the whole way there. And I think you'll see that as I talk more about this a little bit. FAIR is obviously about metadata, and there's a lot of discussion in FAIR about identifiers, and there's a good reason for that. And I want to sort of highlight that because identifiers are really critical when it comes to controlled vocabularies. And I don't think we're doing a good enough job of these. So controlled vocabularies give us all these standard sets of terms that we can agree on. And in many ways, the machines that process them, they don't understand the terms. What they understand are the codes and the identifiers that refer to the terms that are loaded with meaning. And sometimes there's quite a chain of interaction there. But the point is that if your vocabularies are fair, you can begin to get a handle to make it easier for the researchers to understand what the data is, to make it easier to combine data, to do things programmatically. We know when two data sets are measuring the same thing because ultimately you're going back to the same persistent identifier. I once had the experience of working in a statistical agency which shall remain nameless. They had, and I am not joking, more than 10,000 variations of one of the most common ISO code lists in-house. Organically, these problems just blossom. And I think we're seeing that a little bit within demography broadly. Because the example, I guess, that I really like, George, that you came up with was fecundity and fertility, where you have authoritative sources defining those terms in diametrically opposite ways, and yet they're both extremely common terms. If they don't have persistent identifiers that can be cited and have an authoritative owner, you don't actually know which version of the term you're using. All it does is produce confusion. And that's sort of the role of identifiers, is really to point you to the authoritative and unique version of a term. And the possibility for chaos is really, really high. I think we all sort of understand the purpose of controlled vocabularies vis-a-vis data. And there's a lot of them, but discovery is important, being able to integrate data and merge data sets, being able to harmonize data. All of these things are complicated, and they're all highly manual today. And so I think FAIR, in looking at this, that controlled vocabularies are super important in being able to automate these processes. And I think that's the point of this slide. When we look around what's in the world today, I guess we found two really big sources, two standards that addressed collections of demographic controlled vocabularies. One of them being STMX. And I think the content-oriented guidelines and the work that some has been done there is really quite impressive in terms of harmonization. And that came through clearly in this effort. When you look at the global registry and the COG, it's very impressive that there's that high a degree of agreement. Like, everybody accepts those definitions of those terms. And the code lists there, okay, I'm watching Dave's face while I'm saying this, he's cringing, so that's not a good sign. But the point is that there's a resource there that is really, really important. Now, when you look at DDI, we don't have the same kind of registries with the same kind of authoritative backing. We have a lot of rich descriptions of controlled vocabularies, but they don't have the same mechanism, the same platform for agreeing them. And so I think we have rich description on the DDI side, but it's a rich description of a pretty chaotic landscape. And so as we assessed this, we saw some really good examples from the DDI world, things like CESDA and ELST, and some of the ones that have already been mentioned in earlier talks, are very nice, but they're not centralized and they're not managed or harmonized to the same degree. Although there are some examples where you have very highly harmonized things like IPAMs for census internationally and so on. Within the SDMX community, and now I have to eat my shoe or something because what Christine just showed you blows this out of the water, basically. But SDMX was really created to exchange data, and they have this idea of an architecture with registries and standard services APIs, and this agreed sort of centralized, they have a platform for doing harmonization at the statistical level. And I think that's why you see them in an almost completely fair state in a lot of ways. The problem with SDMX is that they do this using a technology that is common among the SDMX community, but not the technology used by the FAIR community. And this is where the RDF things that Christine was talking about become really super important. Thing is, SDMX, it's not enough for someone to publish the SDMX stuff as RDF. It has to be done by the authority that maintains it. They're the only people that can assign and maintain the persistent identification. So I'm not going to talk this slide so much. I think you get that problem. But we had a bunch of recommendations from IOSSP, and some of them address these problems for SDMX. And if you read this document, which you can get from the IOSSP website or from the CODATA website, there were a number of things that we recommended, specifically to SDMX, specifically to DDI, to the world at large. George is doing some continuing work in this effort as well in a follow-up activity. But really, we're trying to get the standards bodies to fill in the pieces that they're not addressing today. We're trying to get the people who maintain terms in demography to contribute to a centralized fair vocabulary. And that's the piece that George is more focused on now. George, maybe you can say a word about that afterwards. For SDMX, what we're really recommending is put persistent URIs, fair-friendly persistent identifiers that are maybe based on your URNs, onto not just the code lists, but every code in the code lists. Please do this. Frank has written code to do this. 10 years ago, Frank? I keep slamming these microphones. It's not a technical challenge. It's an organizational challenge that the SDMX was put weight behind the agreed content-oriented guidelines, and hopefully produce a mechanism similar to what Christine showed you, that FAO and Eurostat have with Calibre and Eurovoc. I mean, the technology's there. We know the standards. There are some agreements that have to be made around things like XCOS versus SM, but if we could do that, I think the world would pick those standards up and use them much more broadly, because it wouldn't be the SDMX community using its own resources. It would be that community also providing those resources to the scientific and research communities, which would be great. That we have had some discussions in CODATA through World Fair with Christine and colleagues from FAO in how to sort of align practice from the research side with the practice on the official statistics side. And I think that's impressive work, and we'd really like to promote that as broadly as possible. So this isn't only recommendations for SDMX. For DDI, and this is a big ask, can DDI get its act together in terms of federated registries? And Darren now is smiling. But I guess the idea here that really came out of the document was, can we produce guidance that will say, if we want to produce registries that are centralized and federatable, what is good practice? What are the standards we could use? How could we better verify DDI resources in this area? And again, I'm not going to go through those in a bloody-minded way, but XCOS is a product of the DDI Alliance, and yet do we use it for our own controlled vocabularies? Do our communities use it for their controlled vocabularies? And the answer is not sufficiently, not in an agreed centralized way. And I think those are issues we can address. And again, what about the URIs? Although I think DDI has been more focused on that maybe than SDMX has. I think benefits for the standards communities are huge. We exist to make our data more usable for our users and broadly. And it's in the interest of these standards to be able to share this data, to manage this data, to disseminate this data. And all of the FAIR stuff will help us do that in a big way if we can coordinate around these issues. And I think demography, like I say, is a great place to start. I think other domains would follow if they saw those sort of high-value metadata resources being put out in a fair way. So I feel like this is important, and especially in a world where scientific research and official statistics are combining to address things like climate change, like infectious disease. The policy aspects of scientific research have never been more important as the world collapses around us, right? We need to understand it so we can better govern our response to it. And so I think there really is a point in history where this crossover is especially important. And I think that's really what this effort was starting to get at, and how we use FAIR for this kind of high-value stuff. I don't know that I have to present this slide either, because I think people understand this, but in case you haven't seen this, if we let the world do what it normally does, we will have a proliferation of authorities with a proliferation of persistent identifiers for things that may or may not be duplicative. Getting a little organized about how we do this, about how we approach and centralize and agree these terms is very important. And if we don't do this, other people will, and they'll probably do it badly. And I hate to be a fear-mongering person, but we've seen this happen in other domains before. So I really think collaborations here are critical. Here's the list of the people. And some of them are at this conference and some are not, but this was a really good group of people to work with. I think we got input from a lot of different directions and learned a lot about the kind of scientific aspects and user aspects as well as the technical aspects in this. So George, I don't know if there's any comment you would make further here, but I hope I did your paper justice, George. Very good.
Thank you, Arofan. Any question for this presentation? Yes, Marco.
I don't know if it's really a question, but I would like to ask Arofan, with whom we discussed many things about SDMX development and DDI in the past years. He made some good recommendation to SDMX and DDI to be fair, I think broadly acceptable, about the registry, about the persistent URIs, about, say, moving towards more, a better metadata and also federated registries, all things we were discussing about this several times in the past. You also said that SDMX is not so easy or not complete to publish data in RDF. I don't know if I understood well what you said, but actually there is something which we were working years ago, which was called StatDCAT, which is a profile of DCAT AP, which was exactly the effort of mapping SDMX to DCAT and making possible to expose data, not simply classification, but really the data that the users want to find in an RDF format. And I think we went even further, highlighted that working on the metadata, and especially on something, on a strange animal, I'm not going to further in detail about this because maybe this is a highly technical issue, which is a metadata structure definition in SDMX, which could be the key to make this a conversion and expose data in SDMX. So that was my question to you. Rather than a question, is more of a comment. Are you sure that SDMX is not able today, tomorrow, to expose data in RDF with a metadata-rich format?
Marco? Yes, I will. That was a question, and I'm going to answer it. No, you cannot get persistent identifiers with the weight of SDMX behind them for SDMX published things in the global registry. Have there been some amazingly cool things done by Eurostat, by Insee, even around the reference metadata? I mean, Frank wrote an RDF vocabulary which mimicked the SDMX reference metadata structure. Some great work has been done, but it has to be advocated at the level of the agencies that maintain these things. because they're the only ones that can assign an identifier so that two people using the same thing are literally referencing the same thing. And it's not the technical work, it's not the hard part. It's just the adoption of that in a way that aligns with how the web world and the fair world expects it to behave. It's not even that hard a problem from a technical perspective. It's really more of an organizational and a collaborative problem, if that makes sense.
It's rather a content problem more than a technical issue. It's more a content problem rather than a technical issue.
Yeah, I think the willingness is there now, and I think we need to organize that and capitalize on it, is my sense of it. So, I mean, this is maybe too much of a side conversation to have without beer in your hand, but whatever.
Any other? Yeah, Edgardo?
No, just a small comment on what you were talking with Marco. In fact, one of the projects that is currently ongoing in the technical working group is the definition of what we call internally the SDMX Global Discovery Services. The idea is to assign a unique URL to each agency that is the maintenance entity of any artifact. So once that this is in place, one day, there will be an authoritative source of information about who is the responsible owner of an artifact and where to find it. And then the URLs that are already in every artifact in SDMX will be very easy to convert into URLs. And then you will have the place to look for the original copy of this artifact.
Thank you, Edgardo. That is such good news.
Any question or comment? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Why didn't you mention in your presentation smart metadata?
I don't know. George proposed this talk. Why didn't we mention smart metadata? Is this a smart thing to do, George? It's certainly metadata. It's more foundational than that, honestly. I mean, I think this is relevant. When you think about the presentations we just saw, this is really a little bit of a reflection on those kinds of inputs, in fact. Is harmonized demography a smart metadata? I don't know, but it's important metadata that needs to be done in a smarter way. I mean, that's a terrible answer to your question, sorry, but I'm just trying to make something up here. But I do think it relates to some of the topics here, honestly.
Any other?
Yeah, great talk. Again, about communities, but also the example of Eurostat. Actually, they're maintaining both a SDMX registry as well as, let's say, a copy or more in linked open data, which brings up the maintenance questions. With the current technology, what would you advise both to organizations that adopt SDMX but also linked data technologies? Do it both? Do it in what way would NSI's progress here? The best way with the current technologies, or maybe with the next extensions?
I'm sure you've heard the phrase "a single source of truth," right? I really honestly believe that with things like what Edgardo was talking about, if you're maintaining things in an SDMX form where there's a known owner, a maintenance agency, and that programmatically your URNs are then mapped to URLs, and I think that approach to something that is, if SDMX is what you work in, use that as the source of truth. There's no single good answer to that question, but I do think that you can have a communal view of that kind of a workflow. I see it more important on the dissemination side for FAIR and more important on the SDMX side for reporting and management, if that makes sense. So that's how I would go about doing it. It's in general guidelines.
We are now at the top of the hour, so maybe we close the session like this. And Arofan, you gave us a very challenging, provocative question, so we can talk over the cocktail, maybe. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for the presenters for the enlightening presentations.